You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to Making Tracks, and a very special episode as I joined a roundtable to put questions to the Acolyte showrunner Leslye Headland. We had half an hour with Leslye and discussed all manner of topics, mostly centering around Episode 7 Choice. So here's myself as part of a roundtable with the Acolyte showrunner Leslye Headland.
We can kick off with James.
Our first question is, Indara always appears to do everything by the book, referring to the Jedi Council when needed. So what was her motivation for covering up the events on Brendok?
I think it should be left up to interpretation. My personal opinion is that she sees this entire situation as a terrible, terrible tragedy. And Sol's insistence that he turn himself in at the expense of the one survivor of this, she believes to be an incredibly selfish act. That she's like, if this has all been for anything, let's have it be for this little girl to grow up having achieved what she wanted to achieve, which I think is an incredibly passionate thing for a Jedi to decide, even if it's misguided.
And next we can go to Molly.
Hi, Leslye. First of all, I just want to say it's a huge honor and pleasure. So thank you. And I love your setup.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. So our first question is, the Coven aren't Night Sisters, but did you ever decide if they were connected to any other established Force cult in Star Wars canon or Legends?
Yes, I have particularly ideas about that. I wasn't really, I guess the best way to put it, as I wasn't in a position to establish that in this in these 8 episodes, so I didn't do that. But my personal opinion is that Anastasia probably originates from one of those cults, the one I won't name, but that she was based on the character Lauren from Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. That she was essentially that even at a young age became essentially the de facto leader of people that believed in her and believed in the religion, I guess you would say, of what she felt around the Force and what she was able to do with her own power. So the quick answer is that she established her own.
Next we can go to Jamie.
Hello, I'm here. I'm just sick, so I'm hiding.
Hi, Jamie.
Hello, thanks so much for having me. So now that we've seen episode 7, I'm really curious if you could talk about how you mapped out what audience would see in episode 3 versus episode 7.
We settled on the genre of like a mystery thriller early on for the season. So we wanted to we had 3 major mysteries, which was, why is May killing the Jedi she's killing? Who is May's master? And how does he fit into all of this? And then what actually happened on Brendok between the Jedi and the witches. So what we wanted to map out was that Rashomon kind of idea of, episode 3 gives you tease up the answer for the first question, which is, why is this young woman hunting these Jedi? Oh, okay. She believes that they stole her sister and invaded her home. But by the end of episode 4, all those Jedi are dead except for Sol. So then it's sort of like we're wrapping that up. All 3 of those can't be solved in the finale. So we wrap up that one. Then, you're thinking, okay, so now the master will be the next thing. He gets unveiled in the next episode. So that gets solved. And then the last one, which is the one that's most personal between the protagonists of the show, is what actually happened on Brendok. So that became a reason to re-break episode 3. And now that everybody knows the characters and understands what's at stake emotionally for everybody, now here's what actually happened. So it was mapped out in terms of those 3 mysteries.
And we can go back to James.
So sort of following on from that, well, before that, I just must say that we have to get Lego Acolyte sets. We have to get those. Anyway,
I hope so.
Yeah, very
same.
much so.
That's main reason I'm here. Yeah.
Cool. I will talk to Lego, I promise you. So, Star Wars fans are known for watching the films in different orders and coming up with their own way of, seeing how Anakin became Vader and things like that. And I wondered if you'd ever considered watching The Acolyte back, episode 3 and 7 first, and then we see May going in trying to find Indara. Because I just think that
yeah, absolutely.
You had more empathy for the Jedi that way. Okay, cool.
We considered that actually. There were a bunch of versions early on where we actually named the episode titles. Like it would start with like literally as an homage, like our first episode was called episode 4. Like it was just like we loved the idea of telling the story out of order and then the audience being able to watch it in order because that's a big part of the Star Wars fandom. Yeah. That was deemed too confusing. So we ended up going with this 3 and 7 being standalone flashbacks, which I think was probably at the end of the day still confusing to people. But I liked it because I liked, that whole unfolding of the mystery thing. So I think I would suggest that you watch it in order in air order. But I think that you're right. You would get a lot out of it watching it chronologically. And I think that it would the hope is it would still be enjoyable in the same way that the prequel and original trilogy are, and sequel trilogy.
Hi, this is Ashley Eckstein, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Next, we can go to Mark.
I'm curious, was The Acolyte always intended to be set in this specific era, or did you have another era in mind and things just worked out that it could sit in this time period? I just have a sneaky feeling that you had the Old Republic in mind when you came up with the kernel of this idea and other outside influences, the High Republic publishing program and just the world being what it was, maybe just made it fit quite neatly into that slot. Is there anything in that, or is that just me, coming through and getting fired?
Because it was a story about the bad guys, the Sith, how one would become a Sith in this particular era. Again, I find it kind of strange because there's this attitude of like the Sith have been extinct for a millennia, and I'm like, that's what the Jedi think. Obviously, Maul and Sidious are here, so they're not. They've been practicing the rule of 2 for a long period of time. So then my question was, one, what are the Jedi like 100 years earlier before they've become what George wrote so brilliantly in 1 through 3? And then my other question was like, well, what were the Sith doing when it was just 2 of them, or 2 of them, one of them trying to overthrow another one? Like, how did all of that work? So it was always 100 years before Phantom, because that's the closest reference we have toward the emergence of the Sith and revealing themselves to the Jedi in episode 1. It was just fortuitous that there was a publishing initiative that was coming around the same time. So then we got to actually fold in not just references to the prequels in terms of who our different factions are, and Clone Wars with the witches and all of that other stuff. But then we also had this whole other sandbox to play in.
And next we can go to Molly.
Well, hi again. Now that we know May and Osha's always 1 but born as 2 is more literal, can one twin live without the other? Does their bond go a little bit more deeply than we've even seen?
I would say I would leave that up to either future chapters of the story. But what I can say is that I believe that because Anastasia utilized this power, which is, I think all of Anastasia's power is very potent, but a lot of it is unknowable. Like there's even she, I think, doesn't know the extent of, she knows the extent of what she's capable of, but not exactly sure that when she experiments with it, what will happen. So for example, she's playing around with powers that could create life, that can create life, but instead of creating 1 life, it ended up being 2 lives. So I think her intention, and one of the reasons the Coven is so obsessed with keeping the twins together, is that they believe that this very special miracle that was able to happen under their roof, it could be broken if the 2 of them are separated. Now, in our story, they are separated, and they're separated for a very long time. So it seems unlikely to me that if one of them came to harm, the other one would drop dead. But I do think that because their power and their essence has been split, they both feel incomplete without the other one. And whenever another person notices one of them for as different or their whole selves, the way that Soul responds to Osha, the way that the stranger responds to Osha. I think that also means that while they're split, they are not solely dependent on each other as like one half and one half, even though that's what their family of origin would say. And I think it's the way that the Jedi understand their creation to make sense.
And next we can go back to Jamie.
It was really awesome getting to see Kalnaka fight. I loved that. But it was cool because I'm curious what went into that choreography in terms of balancing. He's a Wookiee, he's a Jedi, but he's also being mind controlled. So how did you find that balance?
Well, as we know, Wookiees are not obviously against antagonists. They can be very aggressive, but they have this honor code specifically about extending their claws, which they don't do for anything except climbing. What we talked about was that when he was under this particular influence, not only would he be so aggressive against, his friends and ostensibly the heroes of the story in a way that felt pretty vicious and unlike his own personality, he would unknowingly make this horrible, horrendous choice that he would never make under his own will. He would never have done. So I guess technically he would get a pass for that, but I don't think he gives himself a pass for it. Oh, but the fight was incredible. I mean, that was all Kogonada who directed the episode, Chris Cowan, my action choreographer and also second unit director. The actor Jonas is the only person who fits in the suit, so he did all of his own stunts in fighting. JJ did almost all of his own stunts in fighting. My only contribution to it was the one time when Soul is grabbing his arm and saying his name, because I just thought it felt like Soul would try to get through to him emotionally, not just fight him. So.
And next we can go back to Mark.
This era, there's the potential for characters that are familiar to viewers of Star Wars fans to appear. Just thinking off the top of my head, Chewie or Yoda or any other character. And I'm conscious that we haven't seen the final episode yet, so don't spoil anything. But let's say you had that opportunity, given that, did you want to focus more on these new original characters, flesh them out, tell this story without, not distraction, that's not the right word, but if a big hitter character comes in, it might draw the attention away from this story that's been so carefully developed? Was that a consideration as you were working this all up?
For sure. Definitely loved the challenge of the latter. Thought that was really exciting. Obviously, was very aware that there were legacy characters that were alive at this time, but they were not available to me. No.
And James has a question.
Yeah. So talking about Soul, we don't believe that Soul intended to kill Anasea. So was his action in self-defense, or was it an error, or are you leaving that up to the viewer to interpret?
Again, I think it's really up to interpretation. I think that I can say my personal opinion, which is that I think that it's just super messy. Each of the Jedi have their own blind spot in this episode, and Soul's is definitely like an emotional, spiritual blind spot. He just feels like, this is my Padawan, I'm Qui-Gon, this is my Anakin, like this is the warrior I am meant to train. And so the paternal protectivism gets kicked in. And that's a thing that obviously is in media, especially, is usually coded as something very, very good. But I think that can also be a dangerous thing. It's not always coming out of what's best for the child or the object of that protectivism. It could be coming out of his own preconceived notions or his, inflated sense of self as well. Like thinking like, I am the person who can help this child live up to their potential. I'm the person that can, save this child from potential danger. So I think it's a little bit of both. It comes from a very good place and it's very natural, but at the same time, it's not automatically good just because you feel it.
Soul's connection with Osha is pretty much immediate. And I don't know whether that's because Indara is sort of saying to him, well, I've got a Padawan, you don't. But, he seems to grasp onto her very, very quickly.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. To me, I thought there was an interesting thing to explore of how do Jedi pick their Padawans? Because obviously the Clone Wars goes through that, but the most, George's version of that is Qui-Gon and Anakin. Just that connection. He observes him. He starts to have this feeling, and then when he goes to the council and says, "I want to train this person, everybody says no. And then he goes, well, I'm doing it anyway, and then Obi-Wan inherits it basically. So I kind of was going from that gut with a compassionate and strong Jedi. He would just act on, this is the Force. This is the will of the Force that I feel this way. And I think Soul just doesn't take the time that Qui-Gon took, number one, but also in hindsight, Qui-Gon wasn't right either. So, I mean, I guess he was right, like in the long-term sense of being right, which makes him a much more together Jedi.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
We can go to Molly next.
Well, on the topic of Soul, who I absolutely love, I have to say, Soul has been a bright spot in the show, and as you guys call him, JJ is just brilliant. So thank you for looking for him specifically. And I love the dynamic of like Soul and Osha. Like it kind of reminds me of like Hunter Omega, Mando Grogu, who are my other favorite pairs. But it almost pains me to ask this, but can there be redemption for Soul now because of his motivations of what happened? Or is he kind of beyond redemption because of the harm that came from these actions, no matter what was motivating him to make them?
I mean, I think it's in the hands of the person harmed. That's truly what it is. Like, does Vader deserve redemption? Right. Luke thinks so. And we saw what Anakin did. Luke believes that. So I think it's in Osha's hands. To me, it's between the two of them. It's not like an easy moral question for the audience to answer.
I love that response. Thank you. I love that you brought up Peter and Luke, and that was really great.
Yeah. I mean, the show, this was always going to be the penultimate episode because it's the betrayal of the father. Like, there's nothing bigger that is Star Wars. Star Wars before Empire was a groundbreaking, thrilling, incredible, transportive marvel of filmmaking, groundbreaking special effects, Ralph McQuarrie, absolutely everything. But the thing that cinches it is I'm your father. Like, that's the thing that makes it go from incredible filmmaking and escapism to probably the greatest modern fairy tale to ever be created. So yeah, the betrayal of the father, specifically father-daughter, it's up to her,
And next we can go to Mark.
The original trilogy had a feel and a vibe, and the prequel trilogy had a very different feel and vibe, and the sequel trilogy has a very different feel and vibe. So my question is, was the intention always to make the Acolyte feel very much like its own era? It clearly is set in its own history, but it does have a different tone because of the world around it. Was that something that you were sort of baking into it to make it just have that slightly different edge that the other shows or other series don't?
Yeah, no, we definitely wanted it to have a different aesthetic than other Disney Plus shows, not just because that's my aesthetic and the aesthetic of the other filmmakers, but also because it is in a different time period. So it would be difficult, I think, for the viewer on just maybe unconscious level to understand, like, this is different. Like, this is not Mandalorian. This doesn't take place in the time frame that it does. This isn't Andor because there isn't the iconography there. So having its own visual style was really important to establishing the setting, but also establishing the show as being different.
And I know James has another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Jackie and Yord, and I just wondered whether you wrote backstories and more about these characters, and whether that's something that you would like to bring to screen, or maybe even take to different format at some point.
Yeah, definitely. Pablo Hidalgo and I have talked about that since wrapping up the season. There's definitely some stuff that I would love to see come to fruition. Obviously, Vernestra already exists in publishing, so also going to do something there. But yeah, I mean, listen, there was a lot of background done on them, both by the actors in the writer's room. Jord Vandar, I've said this before, was a character in a campaign that I played with so there's a pretty large backstory to him. But yeah, it was always the plan to kill them in episode 5, halfway through the season. So it was kind of fun to think about them a lot, and then think, well, because we didn't spend a lot of time with them, maybe there's a way we could keep playing around with them somehow. Oh, somebody asked, I just hear from Molly that there's speculation that the twins' creation is tied to the powers of Plagueis. Is that from you?
Yes, that was from us. I was just about to say. Just basically what you said, and did these powers find their way to the Sith, or are they unconnected or unrelated?
No, of course they do. I'm surprised more people haven't asked me that question. I'm like, obviously.
I got to credit my editor I work with, Tom. He came up with that one, and he's just
he did? Yeah.
He got it so well. Yeah, he's just amazing.
No. Yeah, absolutely. The Sith are looking for the atomic bomb. Like they're looking for what's the card that we can have over the Jedi. Like what is the force power that the Jedi do not have? And so as far as the Sith are concerned, they're in an arms race, and the Jedi don't even know that arms race is happening, because the being that can get the power that Anastasia started playing with will start the Manhattan Project.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Mark, did you have a question?
I did, yeah. Again, going back to different eras of Star Wars, if the Acolyte is your prequel trilogy, and because Star Wars has been so good at moving through the timeline, we've got 3 separate camps of trilogies with other stories in between them. In your head, if this is episode 1, have you sort of thought through that timeline? Because you've got quite a chunk of time now until you get to Phantom. So in your head, have you kind of got waypoints that you'd like to hit as you move through?
Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There were definitely things that we talked about, even in the early on pitch to Lucasfilm, and saying, like, these are the places that we could go with this. Obviously, like, we didn't have all the specifics mapped out. So now that we've done the season, I think that it adjusts. There are a bunch of things that get adjusted, but there were many things in the sequel trilogy as well as the prequels that we just kept kind of pinging and saying, like, okay, we'd like to do this. We'd like to do this thing. Specifically, the power of creating life, how a force dyad relates to that. Like, that's something we'd love to look into. We're not going to cover all of it in season 1, but if we're allowed to continue working on it, it's something that I felt like would be really interesting. Again, the development of that power. How does it work? How is it connected to 2 people? Do you need those 2 people? Do you not? Like, how do you get powerful enough to create an Anakin? Like, how do you improve upon and then perfect what Anastasia was trying to do? How do masters and apprentices work? Is it possible for 2 dark side users to be equal, or is it always craving power, holding power? And if it is, then how does one recruit their apprentice? We see it happen with Palpatine and Anakin, but in a time period where a little bit of the Wild West for the Sith, meaning they either have to dogmatically do the rule of 2 in order to stay alive, which of course is the intimation when Yoda says there's always a master and an apprentice. But then you also have other Sith adjacent factions that I think would be really interesting to explore. So yeah, we had like a bunch of bullet points. These are a bunch of things that you could cover if this were an ongoing story.
5 seasons to answer all these questions, please.
Yeah.
And next we can go to James.
Will the vocal minority of Star Wars fans have an impact on season 2 and beyond? Because I guess by now you've must have very, very thick skin, because it's really horrible what's going on within Star Wars fandom at the moment, and I don't think it's particularly fair or right. And you fleshed out an amazing story that deserves to be told, and there's more to tell.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I spent a long time working on this, and in the years of working on it, of course, like thought over and over again, like, oh gosh, I can't put that here, but like, let's store that away for later. But that doesn't answer your question though. But yes, I have been thinking so much about.
Good.
I'm in love with the story, and I do feel like there's more to tell. But I think you asked me a different question.
Well, no, I just think fandoms, a small minority of fandomers, of obviously the reviews that they're putting out and stuff, which is trying to damage the show, which is completely unfair. And
oh, I see. Yes.
I don't want that to be the factor that causes us not to get a second and subsequent seasons.
Yeah, me neither. Take with that what you will. I would like that to not happen. As I would like that to not happen as well.
Yeah, no, the same.
Like you said, it's like it's the reality of the fandom, and it's the reality of how the internet works as well. I think sometimes it's the term is fandom, and it's like the term should be internet. Like that should really be.
Yeah, I completely agree. When do you think we'll hear about a second season?
That's a really good question. I know that it takes a while from a streaming standpoint to get all of the data, but I don't know how long that takes. unlike Netflix, which is the only other streamer I've worked for, where you drop the entire season, there's this sort of immediate reaction and immediately it's trending. And there's this sort of fanfare around that. The weekly release and the way that they tally that stuff is something I'm not as familiar with. So I'm waiting to get that information personally. Thank you.
Thank you. Visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely so no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.